Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be. Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is the third Humanianity Conversation, which was a presentation to a United Religions Initiative meeting in 2011 that I discovered recorded on my computer. And since it gives a pretty good overview of the humanity concept as I had at that time, I thought it would be a useful addition to this series of conversations. At the beginning, there is a fair amount about how and why this concept arose during the course of my lifetime, which may provide a little additional perspective.
And to create cultures of peace, justice, and healing for the earth and for all living beings. Also, I would like to read the first four principles, first 4 out of 21 principles of the URI. We are a bridge-building organization, not a religion. We respect the sacred wisdom of each religion, spiritual expression, and indigenous tradition. We respect the differences among religions, spiritual expressions, and indigenous traditions. We encourage our members to deepen their roots in their own tradition.
And just in light of our program this evening, we include humanism, humanianity as one of these expressions. Thank you.
Bill Van Fleet is a member, and as you heard, there are half a dozen FOBs, FOBs, Friends of Bill's. I haven't heard that since Bill Clinton's day. Bear with me a minute. Bill's got a tremendous background in education. He described himself as an older psychiatrist in private practice in Shelby, North Carolina. He's attended the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte for many years and attended the weekly philosophy discussion group there for 10 years. He was educated at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where he got a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. Also went through the pre-med classes, stayed on, got a Master of Science at George Washington, and the Master of Science is also in Psychology, and then entered med school at George Washington University, where he received his MD in 1961. He spent 3 years in psychiatric residency at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C. He served as a psychiatrist at the Philadelphia Naval Hospital. He has had a practice at John Olmsted Hospital, our North Carolina State Psychiatric Hospital in Butler, North Carolina. He's been at the North Carolina Memorial Hospital in Chapel Hill. He's been a consultant at the C.A. Dillon School in Butler, which is the maximum security correctional school for the juvenile justice system in North Carolina. He's been a director of the Children and Youth Unit at Cherry Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina, another state psychiatric hospital. And he came to Shelby, where he resides now, to be director of clinical services at the Community Mental Health Center, and then established his private practice of psychiatry in 1979. He gave me a little addendum, which probably more accurately describes his current prowess in the field of many different endeavors. And 2 or 3 years ago, he shifted from the Unitarian Church to Watershed Charlotte a somewhat fundamentalist-oriented with advanced thinking Christian church, now holding meetings at Center Stage in Charlotte on Sundays. And he spends Friday evenings through Tuesday evenings in Charlotte, not in Shelby, engaged in ballroom dancing for as many hours as he can arrange. That being said, Bill, we're delighted you're here tonight to have a discussion about this. Thank you for doing this.
Well, I wanted to thank you all for letting me present what I have to present this evening. When I discovered Global URI, I thought, and that was about a year ago, I guess, when Serene Jones gave her presentation at this church, the Union Theological Seminary, the head of that. I was quite impressed with the idea of religions coming together and cooperatively. And as you will, I think, come to understand, this I see as a phenomenon that is a part of maybe a somewhat bigger phenomenon that is what I'm interested in and trying to present and see if there is agreement about it. The ultimate relevant idea is humanianity, which is what I'm going to be ultimately talking about, but there's so much that goes into it to understand it that it'll take a little while before that becomes evident. I do want to ask how many people here have been to the website, the Humanianity website? Okay, just a few, fine. So I'll be kind of being very basic about this. My religious background is maybe a little deceptive. At one time, coming back from the Unitarian Universalist Summer Institute many years ago, I was thinking to myself, now, if I tell people I'm an atheist, they really won't have the right idea about me, and I really need to have a label that would more adequately describe me, and so I worked on it. I finally came up with poly-ideo, pseudo-theistic, pragmaticistico-ethical, secular, humanistic, optimistic, existentialist.
And we thought Humanianity was hard.
So I am happy to say now that it's gotten a lot easier. Now it's just Humanian. But I need to try to clarify what that's about. Well, first, a little bit more about my religious development. It doesn't sound like religious development. I was an only child, and my father went away to war when I was about 5 years old. Prior to that time, he had interested me in his amateur scientific equipment, which I loved. And so when he was gone, I messed with his stuff and experimented with it and so forth. And using my childhood fantasy, I worked on a machine to bring people back to life. And it was kind of patterned after the Frankenstein movie. And so I had the Geisler tubes and the Jacob's ladder going and also I was given chemistry sets, and I was just thrilled with this whole issue of chemistry. And I was a relatively unsupervised, almost totally unsupervised child, I guess. And so I had as my one source of information, the Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, and pulled some stuff out of that. And after I had my tonsillectomy and had been anesthetized, I got to reading up on things and found chloroform could be made by bubbling nascent hydrogen from hydrochloric acid and seeing it through carbon tetrachloride. That was a piece of cake. Carbon tetrachloride was carbonic cleaning fluid. And so I made this stuff, and I had willing subjects from amongst my friends. The science teacher, there was a visiting science teacher that came to my house. I demonstrated anesthetizing somebody. She was, she went down and asked my mother, "Is that really, what he's doing?" And she said, "Oh no, of course not. She didn't know." So from there, I got interested in one of the guys had a dream. And so I thought, well, we can study anesthesia dreams, especially since I was wanting to compare that with what I had. And so we did some experiments along those lines. When one of the guys seemed to develop an unusual interest in being a subject over and over, right underneath chloroform in Webster's Unabridged Dictionary was chloroformism. And I could see, no, this has got to stop. So I stopped that, but continued my interest in what had happened. My subject related this long dream, and then when I said, well, okay, now take it easy, he woke up. He opened his eyes and said, "Did I communicate with you?" And I thought, that's hypnosis. So I got from that into hypnosis. And started hypnotizing and so forth. And then we were getting into high school, and I began to, I forget how I got interested in philosophy, but philosophy and psychology and psychiatry all began to come together. And so I made it through all of that without any tragedy as far as I know. Thank God the experiment with making nitroglycerin did not work. so at any rate, so with my interest in philosophy and my interest in understanding about things, and my observation that so much of what we do is bad, and that we don't have to do. And there's so much pain, suffering, disability, and early death that we cause. That has been kind of the background of my whole life since then, trying to make use of understanding to figure out how can we have a better life than we have ever had before so far, because I have enough knowledge of history to know that we've always done these bad things, and you all know what I'm talking about. Pay attention to the news media and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to run ahead in my life to more recently, when things seem to be coming together. My understanding of why we have these difficulties and so on, and I, being totally unsupervised, my religious, actual formal religious background was almost nil. I know that I went to Sunday school, but I don't remember anything about it. And so I didn't have any particular faith or belief system or something that that I felt like I had to follow. And so I followed my own logic and so on. And this was based a lot on what I was doing in my practice, not of a religious nature, but having to do with how the mind works and why we suffer and why we do the things that give us such problems. So at any rate, that's kind of a picture of my religious development. Now, I want to start presenting how I pulled everything together and how it's relevant to this group and relevant, I think, to the world. What I'd like to do is to kind of make sure that I'm having dialogue to some extent. Of course, I got a lot to present, but if I am saying something that doesn't make sense, I would really like to know. And so I thought what we could do is, as I go along in presenting this, if there's something about it that you feel like is unclear, if you would raise your hand, and then I may or may not stop at that point and ask what the question is, and so on. As we go along, I'll have the feeling like I am more meeting the understanding. In other words, what I'm saying is having some meaning for you all. Okay, so what the vision that I have that seems to be different from most everybody else's vision is that most people, I think, see us as having achieved where we're going to be, and it's either continue or go downhill from this point on. And I have a drastically different picture about that. Yes.
When you talk about this achievement and being on plateau, are you referring to all of humanity, or are you referring to the subset of humanity that lives in North America?
Globally. Well, one of the things that I also want to clarify is not only am I talking about globally, I'm talking about a time frame that is different than what most people think in terms of for this purpose. Most people take a look at what's happened in the past few decades and have said we are perhaps going downhill, or maybe we're going up a little bit. I'm taking a look at the development of our species, and I'm saying that in a certain respect, I think that our species is just a toddler, that it has a lot of development ahead of it to a much better place than we have ever been. We are still just a toddler, and we don't have an adult around to help us understand what it's going to be like to grow up, but we can use our imagination. And so the way that I see it is that on this planet there are all of these species, and one species has undergone two exponential changes, making it drastically different from all other species and drastically different from the way it was before these exponential changes occurred. And to jump ahead, what I'm interested in is the third exponential change. Now, the first exponential change, and of course I'm talking about us, we're the species that I'm talking about. The first exponential change was the development of the capability of using symbols and the rules for using them that have given us primarily language, other things also. But we are able now to do something that we have never been able to do before, and no other species on this planet can do. Now, some can use symbols, and you can indeed train chimpanzees to understand sign language to a certain extent. But there's no other species that can do what we can do what I'm doing right now. So one of the things that the development of language has enabled us to do is to develop intensive empathy. I can tell you what yesterday I was thinking about doing tomorrow and how I feel about that, and what I think that you might be thinking about how I feel about it. and what I feel about how you're feeling about that. No chimpanzee can do that, nor were we able to do it before we developed this extensive use of language. We essentially are able to use it to an infinite extent, in that I can't imagine any practical limitation. We're developing new words all the time. So exponential change, at first you don't observe anything, and then little by little there's change, and then it accelerates and goes up until you've got something that really seems like an emergent, something that did not exist before and now exists. There's no clear dividing line as to when it didn't exist and when it did. Another thing, of course, that language enabled us to do was to cooperate to a much greater extent than any other species is able to. So we can tell each other how to do things in minute detail. We can give each other instructions. So we're very able to cooperate. Now, the thing is that has been in the service, this tool, essentially, has been in the service of our basic animal nature. Now, what do I mean by basic animal nature? All I mean is whatever we do that other species do also. So, eating, drinking, playing, making love, fighting, all of those things are what we share with other species. So, essentially, we became talking chimps. Okay, now, being that way, we make use of whatever tools we have for things that are good and things that are bad. So we can make nuclear power generators, and we can make nuclear bombs. In other words, having a tool does not mean we're going to do good things with it. And what we've observed is almost everything that we develop as tools can be used by somebody to do something what I think most of us would consider to be bad. Okay, that was the first exponential change. And I'm assuming that so far, y'all are with me on this. The second exponential change began about 2,000 years ago, and especially in the last 200 years, 2 or 3,000 years. And that was the development of the rules of logic and the rules of evidence. The rules of logic are those rules that enable us to determine that there is a contradiction between two propositions or sentences. Now, I want to stop for a minute here and talk about how I'm going to use a particular word, belief. Our language, of course, develops in a very haphazard way, and so we gradually use words in specific ways, but they have all sorts of additional meanings. So what I try to do is to be very precise in how I'm using a word for a particular discussion. Now, let's take a rat and put it in a maze and put food over to the right. The rat begins to turn to the right to get the food, assuming it's hungry. We put the rat back in its cage, and it's behaving as it always has. But there's something different about that rat's brain. And what it is it contains a model now of where the food is in the maze. So when you put the rat back in the maze, then the rat goes to where the food is. So we can say it has a belief as to where that food is. So it is an ability to predict something. We all have in our brains enormous numbers of beliefs Most of them are inactive. But for instance, I will demonstrate a belief that is in the brain of each of you that is inactive and will be for another 5 to 10 seconds. And that is the belief as to where your car is. Now that belief has become active, assuming you have a car. Connected to that belief are other beliefs, like, for instance, that you have a car, that there's such a thing as ownership, et cetera, et cetera. So beliefs are all kind of connected to each other. But essentially, they are models about the way the world is, was, or will be. I'm going to call those actually existential beliefs about the way the world is, was, will be, to distinguish it from a different set of propositions that we can make. Yes?
Can you just distinguish between beliefs and memory?
Yes.
When you mentioned that, I started having to remember.
Yes.
It really has nothing to do with my belief.
Excellent. You could say that memory is a form of imagination, but it is also a belief. It is a belief as to what you would find if you went back in time and saw the thing all the time. It's a belief as to what you would find if you checked out all of the things that should be true now, given that that had happened then, and so forth. So you have memory and fantasy. A fantasy would be a construction of a new kind of experience from pieces of other experiences. And memory is that way to a certain extent, in that we don't remember like video cameras. We remember kind of a skeleton, and then we flesh it in with things at the time of remembering it, and we know that that's a highly inaccurate process. But so there is very definitely a connection between belief and memory. Memory is, in a sense, a belief. If one indeed considers this to be what actually happened, then it is today to be a belief. Yes. Okay. So now, the important point about this is the belief is based upon the fact that there is regularity in the world, predictability. So if your belief is accurate, then whatever predictions would follow from that belief should be found to be true if you check it out. So if you believe that your car is in a particular place, if the belief is accurate, then you could send somebody out and ask them, is it there? And they report back yes, and you go out yourself. You can call the police and ask them to check and so forth. And all of the things that you predicted on the basis of that belief would turn out to be accurate. So we're talking about accurate beliefs are ones that prevent you from making mistakes or reduce the likelihood of making mistakes. In other words, if your belief is accurate, then when you act according to it, according to the predictions from it, then you should not make a mistake. Okay, now getting back to the rules of logic, they all boil down to one primary thing, and that is, are two propositions contradictory? And essentially, if you're constructing a model, let's say of a car, for instance, you've got to know which way the door goes on it. If you don't know if it could be either this way or that way, then it's not a good model and you can't predict anything from it. So we learned, Aristotle in his time started developing the rules of logic, helping us to identify inaccuracies due to contradiction. However, just because something is logically true, because it follows from some other propositions, doesn't mean that it accurately tells you the way the world is. So something else is needed. And more recently, what we've developed are the rules of evidence. And they're basically the rules that scientists use in setting up experiments and making observations and analyzing them statistically and so on. they are the ways that we have of preventing ourselves from fooling ourselves, because we're very prone to do that. So the rules of evidence, added to the rules of logic, have enabled us to start performing miracles, essentially. There was certainly a time, when I would have considered this to be a miracle. Now, I think you can see how this development of science and technology has been exponential. I mean, it started back with the development of fire, and has increasingly developed and has really taken off in the last couple hundred years. We are drastically different than we were 200 years ago. 200 years ago, however, if you tried to tell me that I would be able to get in my vehicle and travel 60 miles an hour down the road, I would say that's ridiculous. I would scare all the horses. And that's one of the problems, you see. In trying to imagine the future that we've never seen, we put it in our current context. We imagine trying to take this particular thing that will be true then and put it in our current context, and we say, well, that won't work, that doesn't make any sense. Certainly that can't happen. So what I'm talking about is a whole complex set of changes that will make us drastically different than we have ever been. And so now we're getting to the main point. What is the third exponential change? Now, again, I'm saying we just gradually noted the beginning of this exponential change. I would say it is a change in our ethics. Now, what I mean is that we have a naturally occurring ethics. And I think we're starting to move a shift to a different kind of ethics than that which comes naturally. Now, what do I mean by ethics? Ethics is a set of beliefs that can be modeled with sentences that have the word should in them. I should do this, you should not do that, we should do such and such, they shouldn't do so and so. Those are ethical beliefs. They're modeled with sentences that have the word should in them. Of course, we've got other words like ought and so forth. Now, in order to understand about this, this shift, we need to ask the question, if I have a belief about something, you could ask me, well, why do you have that belief? And I would then presumably give you an answer. I would give you an answer that would legitimate my having this belief and would be a reason why I believe you should believe it also. Yes?
And what do you mean by natural?
Natural?
You said we all have natural beliefs which are going to be shifted away from our natural inclinations.
Yes.
What does natural mean?
Having to do with our basic animal nature, that we inherited it from chimps. And your question, from chimp-like ancestors, your question is about to be answered, I think. But it's a very good question. First, I want to continue to talk about the legitimization of an ethical belief. In other words, if I say I should do such and such, you can ask me, well, why? Okay, so let's take a specific concrete example. Let's say that I'm holding a gun on a man, and I say to myself, I should not pull this trigger. Okay, so that's an ethical proposition, right? Now you could say, well, why should you not pull the trigger? And I would say, well, if I pull this trigger, I will kill that man. And I should not kill that man. I should not kill that man. If I pull this trigger, I will. Therefore, I should not pull this trigger. You see, it's kind of a syllogism. But the thing is, we're now at another ethical proposition. We have an existential one in here. If I pull this trigger, I will kill that man. That's one of these beliefs that could be accurate or inaccurate or partially accurate or whatever. It's an existential belief that of the sort that under some conditions would be answered by the scientific method, let's say, or by life experience. But in other words, it represents a prediction as to what will happen if I do such and such. But the question is, should I do it or not? Okay, so I have just legitimated this proposition. But you say, well, why should you not kill that man? Well, I say, I should not kill. If I kill this man, I'll be killing somebody, therefore I should not kill this man. And you say, well, why should you not kill? Okay, you can see that it's going upward. The legitimization of ethical propositions goes upward to higher and higher level ethical principles. Now, the problem here is that there's no way that it can be an infinite regress. In other words, that you spend the rest of eternity legitimating at ever higher levels. It has to stop somewhere. So therefore, there is an ultimate ethical principle, we could say. Now that doesn't mean that everybody would agree as to what that ultimate ethical principle would be. But there is one that comes naturally. And here is where we're answering the question. If we go back to our basic chimpanzee nature, we are a group animal. Because we're a group animal, cooperation is very important. And therefore, what has occurred is dominance hierarchies. In other words, there is usually like an alpha male or some leader, or alpha female, depending upon the species and so on. There is a dominance hierarchy where a person low, an animal low in the group, knows I should not do such and such otherwise. And if we wanted to put that ultimate ethical principle into words, we would say we should do whatever X wants us to, X being whoever or whatever is most powerful. Now, when you think about it, that is very strongly a part of our ethics. We're talking about who is most powerful. For the child, it's the parent. The parent says what you should do, and that's what you should do. Your social group says that's what you should do. Your culture says that's what you should do. Your leader says that's what you should do. Or your deity, who is most powerful of all, says that's what you should do. And so what you see mostly is that the ultimate reason why we should do such and such is because X, whoever or whatever is most powerful, wants us to do that. And that's where it stops. Go ahead.
That's learned. All of it is not natural.
I'm sorry?
That's learned behavior according to whichever society you have to land in.
Yes, that's right. But that learning is a naturally occurring process. See, chimpanzees naturally learn.
Right.
Does that sound?
It's memory, yes.
Yeah. So we're talking about our basic animal nature includes the capacity to learn, and we learn our dominance hierarchy. But it's the important part of it is that whom we obey is whoever is most powerful. So we have that at all levels of our social structures, our dictators and so forth. Yes?
How do you define that as ethics? There's no, you're leaving out morality in some of this. What defines it as ethics? The ethics that I believe in are positive.
Okay,
ethical conduct. Okay?
yes, yes.
So you must have another definition of ethics when you talk about this hierarchy.
I do, yes. Remember that, as you point out, words can be used in different ways. And so in order to have maximal understanding, we need to agree how we're going to use words for a particular discussion. So the way I'm using ethics here is not necessarily the way it will be used next week by somebody else, you see. Now, what I said ethics was that set of beliefs about what we should or should not do. And that's all. Now, I can say more about that because we can talk about the ethical sense, which is the motivational state that goes with an ethical belief. In other words, if I believe I should do something, then there is some motivation to do it. Ideally, there would be a lot of motivation to do it that would compete with other motivations. See, like, I really want to do such and such, but I believe I should do so and so. If the ethical sense, that's the term that philosophers have generally used for it, if the ethical sense is strong, then even though I pretty strongly want to do this, I more strongly want to do what is right, and so I do this instead. So there's the ethical belief, and then the motivational state that is associated with it, the ethical sense. And we know that for many people, that ethical sense is not very strong. I've asked people, well, do you feel like what you're doing is wrong? And they said, oh yeah. Well, does that bother you? Well, no, not much. So that would be a weak ethical sense. Of course, it could be more complex what's going on here, why they're telling me that, and so on. Okay, so what we're talking about now is that we have an ethics that comes naturally that has never worked. Now, I have to define worked, right? But are we satisfied with our ethics as it currently stands? I mean, as far as how well it works? We've had it ever since the beginning. And it has never worked so far in that we continue to do stuff that is awful, that I think everybody in this room would agree was awful. So the ethics that we have had that comes naturally to us is not optimal if there is a better ethics. And so what I think is we are beginning to observe little signs that we're making a shift to a different kind of ethics. And the only difference in it will be the ultimate ethical principle. And so I think I have identified the ultimate ethical principle in words. However, somebody else might have a better set of words. I would say that the principle that we're shifting to, and that I think you all would agree with, is that we should do that which will promote not only the survival of our species, but also the good life for everyone now and in the future. And we've got to define good life. The good life is as much joy and contentment and appreciation as possible, and as little pain, suffering, disability, and early death as possible. PSDED. Pain, suffering, disability, and early death. Now, those are overlapping concepts. Yes, go ahead.
Just on a general level, this new ethical principle that you outlined, how is that significantly different from the preamble to the Constitution?
Well, the preamble to the Constitution, which I do not have memorized, is...
the key terms being life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Well, the problem is that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness they're somewhat undefined. What is happiness? This is an effort to be a little bit more specific about it, and also this is not a political statement or but I think what you're saying is that the Constitution is indeed an example of this beginning shift. I would say that it is an example. Keep your hand up. I don't want to let it get by. But see, we can ask the question, what is the evidence that we are making this shift? And I would say that one of the signs, one of the kinds of evidence that we have is that at long last, after 30,000 years or a million years or whatever, we have started setting up social hierarchy where we all sit down together and we work out the rules that we live by according to what we all believe in, and we're all subject to the same rules, as opposed to that there's one person who by force is going to make us do this, that, or the other. That is a shift, see. And another thing that we, along the same lines, that is somewhat new, is human rights. Where did that come from? We've had citizens' rights, but not human rights. Human rights has to do with everyone on the planet. See, so that's something that is new. Now, these are just hints of where we may be going. John?
I hear you say with this paradigm shift, maybe just an embryo. And it's interesting that you refer to it as maybe just a toddler learning how to walk. But hopefully it's an effort for collaboration. And we've been operating, for the most part, from domination and competition. And out of that domination and competition comes great scarcity and great abundance for a few, but primarily great scarcity for a great number of people. So I find it exciting, and that hopefully we are moving toward more collaboration. And you see that in young people, I think. Our Constitution, when that first came about, there was so many skeptics and said, this is the idea that people are self-governing and they have a vote. And this is new stuff. This hadn't been tried before the way that we were trying to do it. So,
yes.
From that perspective, I find it extremely interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
Two things. Are you basically your description of the current basics of ethics is survival, right? Like Darwin, ultimately, you want the strongest member, the person who leads the pack. You just naturally do what power, domination of power, competitive in your second ethical. Is that, did I hear you correctly? Or
I'm not sure. I'm a little worried because it sounds a little bit different. What I'm saying is, that now the second is the one we're shifting to.
Shifting from, I thought. I'm talking about your
Exponential changes?
Well, you're talking about the natural, we have a natural way of being, and that natural way of being is the group animals that always go to the pack, to the leader of the pack, what somebody who's in control tells you to do.
That tends to be how we establish
That's our
our
natural inclination to start.
Yeah, that's how we legitimate our ethical beliefs. In other words, why do I believe I should do so and so? Because if I don't, X, who is more powerful, won't like it.
Well, I hear that pretty much what Charles Darwin said when he studied back in early 1800s. But I wanted to say that it's not just 200 years. The first really significant event of collective expression of what you call the second ethical thing occurred in 1610, I think, in the Magna Carta, where they forced King John in England to actually give rights to human beings as opposed to those who had power.
Okay, I think there is a misunderstanding here. Let me clarify. I am talking about the third exponential change. Okay, we're not talking about the third exponential change in ethics. We're not talking about
We're
that.
talking about the second.
No, we're talking about the first exponential change, making us drastically different, was language. Okay. The second exponential change was the development, essentially, of science and technology, rules of logic, rules of evidence. That has nothing to do with ethics, nothing at all to do with ethics. What we're now talking about is something entirely different, and that is ethics. And we've had a kind of ethics that's been about the same as what is true of chimps and tigers, but we're beginning to shift to something better. So the third exponential change is a shift from the ethics we've always had to a new kind of ethics. Now, this new kind of ethics is not something that has been absent totally. There has been, back indefinitely in time, some feeling that, well, we should do that which will make life good for all of us. Something of that sort. But it has always been very secondary, very minimal compared to our ultimate ethical principle that we ultimately refer to when it gets right down to it and people say, well, why do you believe we should do such and such? And from a religious standpoint, it is generally because that's what God wants. And we know that has not worked yet because there's a lot of difference of opinion as to what God wants and who God is and so forth. Yes?
I've been a student of religions for about 30 years, going back to the goddess epic.
Uh-huh.
We can't really go back much before that because that's 25,000 years ago. And the way that I have been receiving this and studying with other people is that there's actually been two epics, and we are moving into the third.
Okay.
But that the first was, it included what you're saying pretty strongly. I don't know if you've heard of this book called The Chalice and the Blade.
Yeah.
It talks about this whole epic. You might really enjoy reading it. And how it was in a circle instead of from the top down. And that really came into the second, more scientific era. And that we're moving into the third, which is going to be a combination of the two. And then from a religious perspective, it's talked about as a combination of the mother and the father, the goddess and the god epic. Or you could see it as this Chalice and the Blade. But for example, one example, I moved to this city called Concord, just up the road from us. And then I looked up the history of Concord. And it was named Concord because the Native Americans from this area, for hundreds of years, chose this particular area for all of the tribes when there was problems. They would all gather in this area and they would hold gathering meetings so that they wouldn't leave. And this was typical because I lived in New Mexico for 12 years. And I studied the Pueblo people and the ancient Anasazis. They had the kivas, and they passed this talking stick. And they would stay for 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, 2 weeks. They wouldn't leave till there was a court. And when there was a problem deciding where the capital of North Carolina was going to be, they went to Concord and had their meetings there, which I thought was very interesting. So I think that this is in process, what you're saying, but I didn't want you to leave out the fact that we do have models where it was being practiced for thousands of years.
Yes, I think that certainly is correct. That, in other words, it's not like all of a sudden it's appeared. It's always been there, but it has just been so low compared to...
In our epic, definitely.
To the power. Yes.
Bill, it seems to me that it'd be harder to talk about ethics in general as it applies to all humanity than to talk about ethics as it relates to whatever label the individual puts on him or herself. Whether it's their faith tradition that generates ethics for them to follow, or whether it's their political system in the country in which they live. And they're all subject to interpretation, even within the faith traditions or the forms of government. And a good example is in the current situation in Libya. Here's the UN that has a charter and resolutions that if the Security Council votes to implement a no-fly zone anywhere in the world to protect humankind, they can do it. And then there's another resolution that says you can use whatever measures are necessary to protect the people. That's now being debated because there's not agreement on what is ethically using any means, whatever. So it sort of comes down to which side you're on. It reminds me of James Carson's book, The Religious Case Against Belief, and he's a professor up at NYU, where he says, if you have a set of beliefs for your faith tradition, and you believe them so strongly, you automatically put everybody that's not in your faith tradition on the other side as the enemy. And that's how violence is created. I just don't understand how you're talking about a generalization of ethics, because they come out of institutions to me, and they're institution specific.
You mean the specific ethical beliefs?
Is a function of the institution you feel a part of.
Yes. Well, that's right. And that institution tends to have properties that say this is what you should believe, and people would tend to say, I believe it because I'm a part of this institution, or that this institution is subservient to something higher that is more powerful, and so forth. So let's listen again to this ultimate ethical proposition that I think is the one that we're shifting to, in that it's always been there a little bit, but that it will become the dominant one. That we should do that which will promote not only our survival as a species, but also the good life for everyone now and in the future. And then the good life is simply defined as much joy, contentment, and appreciation as possible, and as little pain, suffering, disability, and early death, PSDPD, as possible. See, so there's no reference in there to who is most powerful or what is most powerful. It's a basic concern for everyone that we are concerned about our species, not in some power hierarchy, not that there can't be or shouldn't be some social structure and decision-making hierarchy and so forth. Of course, it's going to, but in democracy, for instance, that is determined by everyone. It's not determined by who has the more powerful guns or ability to inflict PTSD on other people. Yes?
Are you saying that mankind, everybody on the globe, will, in this third plateau, act out in own self-interest, or else because they'll realize that there's no other way to go, that what's in the self-interest of everybody is the higher ethic and cooperation and less pain, moral goods, and in spite of their differences, that they will reach that enlightened self-interest.
Yes, I believe that this shift is occurring because of enlightenment. And by enlightenment, I mean that we, as opposed to chimps, are getting able to understand the big picture. We're understanding that we're on a little planet, and that what happens to us depends upon what we do. Yes.
I'm interested to compare your views to, are you saying that our decisions are made on a rational basis? I'm just thinking about David Brooks' new book, who says that we do not make our decisions from rational means, but from emotions. Is this the old paradigm, new paradigm you're talking about?
No, I think I have a vague awareness of this book and so forth, but I haven't read it and so on. I think it is, my vague impression is that it's an overstatement. That I think that we, of course, always have emotion. And that emotion is a part of our motivational states. We have hunger, and we have thirst, and we have anger, and we have joy, and we have all of these different things that push us to do things. So we call those motivational states, and they operate through our belief system, our predictions. Like, I want to make this hunger go away. If I eat some food, I will make this hunger go away. Therefore, I want to eat this food. If I go to the store, I will be able to get food. Therefore, I want to go to the store and get food. I want to make money so I can go to the store and so forth. We're motivated by hunger and thirst and sex and so forth, but also achievement and also affection and bonding and the whole range of things that are true for, that are part of our basic animal nature. But it's our understanding of what will happen if we do this, what will happen if we do that, and getting a bigger and bigger picture that is indeed inclusive for everybody, for our whole species. That's the thing that we are able to do, that we hadn't been able to do before when we didn't even know we were on the planet.
So your fellow you mentioned earlier who said, well, I know I'm not doing the wrong thing. I know I'm doing the wrong thing, but I just don't care. He's the old paradigm guy. And the one you're moving into is the one who analyzes analytically and says, this is what I should do, I'm going to do it.
No, not necessarily, because that was a person who did not have a strong ethical sense. But there have been people who have had very strong ethical sense that have been where the ultimate ethical principle was that we should do that which will, is one of the most powerful ones. The Pope, for instance, a highly ethical person. His ultimate ethical proposition, I think, is we should do what whoever or whatever is most powerful wants us to do, and that is God. So and there's lots of rational thinking there. The ultimate ethical principle, I think, is not one that is going to be successful in the long run. It hasn't been so far.
But if I'm saying, I want to do this bad thing, and I know it's wrong, but I want to do it anyway.
Well, yes, I want to do it anyway, but the question is, should I? And if I believe that I should not, does the motivational state produced by that belief, is it stronger than my wanting to do it for whatever reason I want to do it? You see, in other words, I want to do this for certain reasons, and I want to do this for certain other reasons, but I want to do this one more, so this is the one I do. Now, certain reasons, it could be competition between hunger and thirst, or seeing such and such a movie and going to such and such dance, or whatever, or it could be between some particular thing like that and what I believe I should do, like stay home and study.
Or the power figure won't find out, and I'm going to do it anyway.
That's one of the main problems with the ethics that we've had all along, is that the emphasis is on, well, if he or it doesn't find out, then I'm home clear. It is a defective ethics. And so it's not surprising how we have been treating each other ever since the beginning. Whenever you want to say the beginning began, 30,000 years ago, a million years ago, or whatever. It is not the best we can do. But we haven't realized that there's something better that we can do until recently. And we're beginning to have that awareness. Yes?
You describe yourself as an optimist. What would you say to the pessimist who looks at the world and they say the rising power is China, and they do not have an ethical system even to the degree that we've developed in the United States? And yet, if you look at the world and you think that it's fairly obvious, trend-wise, to see not the more evolved nations being on top.
I'm sorry, I missed some of your words. Say it again, last sentence.
If you look at the world and you see a great possibility that the lesser evolved ethically, no human rights, China, will be on top and not nations, and I think the United States is a long way to go with this, but a more ethical, evolved nation not being on top. How does it work that you have very rare instances of Gandhi or Mother Teresa or Desmond Tutu? They're the rare individuals who want something good for everybody. They've never been the majority. So how do you see a world where the majority is like Mother Teresa or Desmond Tutu?
Yes.
When everything points to just the opposite, that the dark is more numbered than the light.
Okay. Now, regarding, there's two main questions here. In the first place, optimism versus pessimism. What I observe is most people are, with regard to this issue, pessimistic. They don't believe that it can happen. And the reason that they don't is because it would scare all the horses. In other words, it is hard to imagine things the way they will be in the future if we're lucky. And if, there's another part to it, if we make it be that way. Well, what I observe is that people say, yeah, that's great, and I'm really going to enjoy seeing it. progress in that direction. I hope they do it. And you can see what's left out. Right. In other words, if we wait for them to do it, and we is our species, it's not going to happen. So whom does it depend upon? It depends upon you. Now, what can I do? Well, now remember, we're at the very beginning of this change. We're just toddlers. So we can't expect, we're not going to be around at the time of, I call it the time of Homo rationalis. We will not be around at that time. All of us, though, have benefited by what people have done who have come before us, who have tried to make the world a better place, who have put forth effort and energy and even sacrifice in our behalf, even though they didn't know us, and we don't even know who they are. Okay, so what can we do? What we can do is say, well, this is more than just an interesting idea. Be interesting, and I'll think about it maybe next time I hear about it or something. We can say, no, I ought to study it further. If there's something here, then I need to get in on this and do my part. Now, what would that be? Well, it involves study. You have to study because just because I'm sitting here and saying these things doesn't mean it's so. There may be inaccuracies. It may be all that. Maybe actually the situation is totally hopeless, and when you arrive at that situation, then fine. You can sit back and watch, the end times, if that's what your belief is or whatever. But if it is possible that this is what we as a species are able to do and may possibly bring it about, even if the odds are small, if we work toward it, we're better off odds-wise than if nobody takes it up, nobody moves with it. Say,
Bill, excuse me, it's after 6:30. Why don't we take about 5 to 10 more minutes and then wrap it up? And this could go on. It's quite interesting and go on a long time, but we do serve dinner, so
yeah, I realize that.
And you control the questions from here on out. But let's try to wrap it up in 10 minutes.
Okay. I had a question.
I have a quick question. Yeah, in your whole statement, it seems to assume that we are here on this earth and we're gone afterwards, and there's nothing else left of us. Is that correct?
No, not
you said
necessarily.
something about earlier you were an atheist, and so atheists only believe in people die and it's over.
Okay.
Where other people believe in we're evolving, and we are going on beyond.
Right. Okay. Let me clarify. It's a good question toward the end here. Humanianity, to be humanian, requires only one thing, and that is that you are committed to the ultimate ethical principle, the Humanian ultimate ethical principle, which is we should do that which will promote not only the survival of our species, but also a good life for everyone now and in the future, the good life being defined, as we said. That's all. So you can be a Christian Humanian, an atheistic Humanian, a Buddhist Humanian. You can. So my opinion about that is just another opinion. But what I'm talking about is the effort that we need to engage in, to work toward this third exponential change. Now, there are many religions. They have different belief systems. If you imagine them all around, somewhere close to the base of a mountain, all going up the mountain, and they're kind of like worms, and the front end grows and the back end atrophies, so that ultimately they're moving up the mountain. And that mountain is toward the ultimate ethical principle, or toward humanianity. That's what humanianity is. So every one of our religions is a religious tradition. That doesn't mean that everything that has been a part of that religion should stay in it. We can get beyond it. For instance, within my own religious tradition, the idea of stoning homosexuals and rebellious children to death, I think we're kind of gradually getting away from that. See? So, but that's very much in my religious tradition. But we're developing the idea of a loving, accepting God. That, I think, is movement toward that which will not promote PSD. So, humanity does not mean you can't be of your particular religion, but it means that you're looking within your religion to say, can it improve? And Christianity is, you're seeing all kinds of improvement occurring. And I assume in the other religions, you can see that also. So, and then we get into a whole area of us having interchange between religions to benefit all of them and so forth. That's still another topic. So I guess, is there any other question? If not, I suppose.
I have one.
Yes, okay.
If I take you at face value, at least what I'm hearing is the ethics at a materialistic level. And, it's a materialistic sort of happiness. It is achieving a certain level of welfare. It's minimizing suffering and so forth. And what I find missing here is the spirituality side of things. How important is spirituality in the way you see humanity? For example, many religions say that you should treat others as you would like to be treated, or sometimes actually treat them better than how you would like to be treated.
Okay.
And sometimes you even say, sacrifice yourself for the happiness of others.
Right.
How does that fit into that scheme of things?
You would evaluate that according to whether it is consistent with this ultimate ethical principle. And it sounds pretty good. So, now there may be situations where that it would not be consistent with this ultimate ethical principle, and there are many situations where there's some answers that are obvious. Terrorism, I think, has to go on this, but there are other things where you don't know. I mean, should I take a drink of this or not? You see, where you can't figure out what the ethical thing is to do. So there's latitude as to what you can do that is not necessarily something you shouldn't do or something you should do. Materialism is another issue. And spirituality, that is a whole new topic. I'm just finishing up a book on the mind-body problem and free will versus determinism problem. I've just about got it completed, and that really speaks to that issue. But it is a complicated thing that you have. It requires opening up new pathways in the brain. I'm excited about that, and maybe you all would like sometime in the future to review that. But I first got to finish the darn book. I think we got to set ourselves free.
Now we all can see humanity, how much better we can